Wonderful.
Okay, are we ready?
We are ready.
All right, have you set it up for me to share my screen?
Go for it.
Okay, let's see here. All right. All right, so y'all can see the screen, okay?
Yes.
Okay, at its 2021 convention, the League of Women Voters of Virginia approved a study of education equity in the Commonwealth. And League members from across the state set out to research and document whether all children in Virginia have access to a high-quality education. And if not, what changes need to be made in funding public K-12 schools. Here's a list of our committee and subcommittee members. And here are some of the faces. Our three subcommittees: one, defined high-quality education; two, looked at whether Virginia's education funding was equitable, considering the wide disparity in capacity and funding among divisions, and compared how Virginia ranks among states in basic funding for education. We hope you read the full report, which gives a clearer and wider view of this complex issue than this presentation will do. Of course, we all know why the League believes education is so important. A high-quality education is a foundation for democracy. It's essential to providing students with the intellectual skills they need to become active citizens, and public education is available to all children, despite their family's wealth, ethnicity, religion, or other factors. And you probably did know this, since Carolyn mentioned it a minute ago on her slide. Virginia is the 10th wealthiest state, yet in per pupil funding by the state, we rank 41st, joining states such as Missouri and Mississippi. Fundamentally, our study provides evidence that the state's funding of K-12 public education is both inadequate and inequitable, that Virginia does have the resources to adequately fund schools, but not the will to do so. We also have the ability to assess the capacity of local school divisions and design formulas that will fund public schools in a way that will provide a high-quality education program for all students in Virginia's public schools. Part of the problem is the Constitution. You can see the wording here, which I'll put up again in the next slide, but the wording here is aspirational rather than making any kind of requirement for the General Assembly to fund education. This is the way it reads: the General Assembly shall provide for a system of high-quality free public education, public elementary and secondary schools for all children of school age throughout the Commonwealth, and shall seek to ensure that an educational program of high quality is established and maintained. And it's this shall seek that is the problem. Standards for a high quality education are established by the State Board of Education in the Standards of Quality, a document which is subject to periodic approval and funding by the General Assembly. The General Assembly has consistently underfunded the standards of quality recommendations that they approve. And our study concluded that unless the language in the Virginia Constitution that describes the state's obligation to provide a high-quality education for all students is changed from being aspirational to being a requirement, not much is likely to change. Other states have successfully brought court action to force their states to increase school funding based on their Constitution's stronger language. An attempt was made at some time in the past with Virginia, but the judge ruled that while he believed that the schools are clearly underfunded, the Constitution doesn't require the General Assembly to adequately fund schools. There are clearly statewide problems with Virginia's educational funding. We invested in 2021, we invested 4.3 billion less, excuse me, than the average of other states that have a comparable household income. And this has been going on for years. And again, We're the 10th wealthiest state, yet in the money we spend on schools, we rank 41st. We look at teacher pay, the average teacher pay is 10% below the national average. It was in 2020. And starting salaries for teachers were even worse, ranking 25th. The Education Law Center gave Virginia a D in education funding. There are also funding gaps within the state. It's not just that the entire state is underfunded. There could be up to a $200,000 difference in what is spent per student, well, not per student, but per classroom. Localities, not the state, bear the majority of the cost of public education. And in 2020, local governments spent $4.4 billion above the required that they had to spend for the standards of quality to provide important services for students. Poorer school divisions do not have the resources to provide the same level of personnel, programs, and services as wealthier school divisions. Excuse me, full funding by the state for these additional programs and services would reduce some of the inequities. Rural areas have borne the brunt of state funding cuts. The state share of funding has decreased 5.4% statewide in the past 10 years, but it's down 6.8% in rural schools. Staff to student ratios have improved statewide, but they have decreased in local schools. And if you look at this, the pupil per pupil funding, this last bullet item on here, it can vary by thousands of dollars per school division. In Arlington, spends $19,744 a student, whereas Norton spends $9,707 per student. Now, if you multiply this by 20 students in a classroom, you can get to a $200,000 difference in the resources that are put into specific classrooms. This is an elementary school classroom in rural Lee County. The pupils are studying among trash cans that catch rains from the school's leaking roof. During a tour of schools in King and Queen County, a Virginia Pilot editorial described a school that looked like it was, quote, on the far side of the moon, unquote, compared to schools in nearby, more urban peninsular communities. And again, if we look at the differences here, the state makes some effort to balance the need and the capacity of the school divisions, but it still leaves behind rural and poor urban schools, and funding gaps exist. If we look at this chart, we've got three columns here. The first one is how much the locality spends per pupil. The second column here is how they rank in funding across the state. Are they up near the top? Are they near the bottom? The last column is important because it demonstrates how much they are able to pay for schools based on local taxes and wealth. If you look at Fairfax and Giles County, Fairfax is high up there. Fairfax is 11th in the state in their capacity to fund schools. As far as what they actually spend, they rank 4th. So they're doing better than they are able to do actually. Giles County is a little bit different, but similar situation. They are 104th in the state in their ability to pay, but they're actually paying even a little bit less than that, 111th. Now, then if you look at places like Lee County and Petersburg, Petersburg is 120th in the state in its ability to pay based on taxes and income, but it actually ranks 41st in what it puts into its schools. Lee County is in a similar position. They are 132nd in the state, but they actually pay up on the 58th spot. Now, Washington County is a flip here. They are 77th in their ability, but they're only ranking 108 in their what they actually pay out. So you can see that there's a huge gap between school systems. With more than half of Virginia's schools over 50 years old, and many even older, the state now has an overdue bill of more than $25 billion to replace inadequate schools. And this is not a problem that's unique to one part of the state, it's in all regions. Oh, sorry, chat came up. Virginia's oldest school buildings are in our poorest divisions. And these divisions can't support bond referendums or repay loans for capital projects with their low incomes and tax bases. Prince Edward County, where I live, replacing an elementary school where trash cans are placed to catch roof leaks on rainy days, it would cost us $39 million. That would require a 25.5% increase in the property tax in a county that has a median household income of $44,253. Now, schools can apply to have a referendum on a 1-cent tax increase for schools, but in 2022, the General Assembly refused to allow Prince Edward to do just this. Sorry, I've been on the wrong slide and running my mouth. Again, if we look at Norton and Arlington up here, if you had that 1-cent tax increase, Arlington could raise $7 million. Norton could only raise $23 million, and Prince Edward couldn't raise much either, but we were denied even the opportunity to do that. Until the latest budget that came out recently, the last time the state had made school construction grants, not loans, but grants available to localities was in 2009. The Literary Fund is supposed to provide low interest loans to school districts for school construction. But in the last 5 years, only 24 million of the Literary Fund went to actual loans for school construction, while 790 million has gone toward teacher retirement costs. The Virginia Department of Education has guidelines and standards for school facilities when old schools are renovated or new schools are built. But these standards fall short of guaranteeing that all students have adequate schools and classrooms, because first, a locality must have the capacity to build or renovate to even consider whether they're going to try to meet these recommendations in the guidelines. Another problem is teacher salaries. Again, teacher salaries in Virginia are 10% below the national average, 25% and 25 ranking in the last national survey for starting salaries. And we've had huge resignations, and every school I know of is looking for teachers. And of course, part of the problem with this is funding. Now, it's not just that the school pay is bad, but if you compare what teachers make to peers with a comparable education, we have other issues. In Virginia ranks 25th in nationwide in teacher starting pay, but again, if you compare what teachers make to what other professionals make, we did rank 50th out of 50 states in 2021. A newer meta-analysis came out last week by the Economic Policy Institute, and it shows we have now moved up to being 48th in the country. Only Oklahoma and Colorado are worse. But even though we moved up 3 spots, this number here, our teachers earn 32.7% less than their peers with a comparable education. This figure has remained constant. Only thing that's changed is Oklahoma and Colorado just got even worse. So we have one of the worst gaps in the nation for this issue. Excuse me. There's good news in this 2022-23 budget. We are fortunate there was a huge budget surplus, almost 1.94 billion, partly because of COVID money. And because of this, partly because of this, school funding was up by almost 3 billion. So we took this and then added some more to it. Teacher and staff raises, they are projected these of 5%, but the problem here is the state pays less than half this 5%. They're suggesting this, but who pays? In a previous budget year with a similar situation, one county had to reject raises for its teachers because it couldn't afford its share. So saying this 5% raise doesn't mean everybody's going to get it. And the state is making some effort to balance need and capacity, but it still leaves behind rural and city schools, where students in areas of poverty are likely to need more services and more expensive services if our goal is equity in education. You can see here that in this current budget, there's $145 million for an at-risk add-on program that applies to high poverty areas. And there's some money in here for construction finally. There was an 80 million for one-time construction grants, actual grants. The Literary Fund is also offering now 50 million for construction grants and 40 million for construction loans. But if you remember, we need more than 25 billion to catch up. That's just to catch up. That's not for building for the future. That's just to catch up. So this is a drop in the bucket here. What the General Assembly didn't do is it failed to develop any kind of long-term funding policies. Again, we have a budget surplus this year, and in this next biennial budget, the funding is improved, but there's no mechanism in place to guarantee that this will happen. They still failed to fund the standards of quality as a minimum for high quality education. And they also reduced future tax revenues, which are going to put future funding at risk. So again, one of the things that we believe is critical is amending the Virginia Constitution to state that the General Assembly shall provide, rather than the current language of shall seek to ensure, an educational program of high quality. This is not a new idea. In 1969, where the new Constitution was being considered, a group of Republicans and Democrats tried to add this to the Constitution. They weren't successful, but it's an idea that I think has come to its time. Now, for strategies for operational funds specifically, we believe that the General Assembly needs to fully fund the standards of quality. They barely meet the criteria for high quality education, and having this burden placed on localities skews the funding disparities even more. And we just basically need to raise our per pupil investment to the average of other top 10 income states. And again, this would be 4.3 billion more a year. And we've had years of underfunding. We need to increase teacher salaries so that they are comparable to salaries of those with a comparable education, and also to teachers in other states. Now, this last budget did offer no loss funding, which means that localities won't lose money automatically when the number of students declines. This makes budgeting very difficult and can yo-yo up and down during a year. Also, we need to offer English language learner funding that's comparable to other states. Governor Northam proposed increasing the staff for English language learners, but it wasn't included in the budget. And there's nothing in the current budget for this. Now, as far as infrastructure, something needs to be done about this to set up a mechanism for long term. We need to advocate for a state commitment to fund school construction using grants and other mechanisms based on division's ability to pay, not rely totally on a school division's local tax base. We need to increase and prioritize the literary fund for school infrastructure. And these minimum building standards need to be part of the standards of quality so that they don't just affect new construction and renovation, so that their school systems are required to bring their schools up to par. Perhaps issue state bonds dedicated to school construction to address that $25 billion deficit. And we need to allow localities to impose this sales tax for school construction, subject to voter approval in the locality, but not have the General Assembly getting in the way of a locality's ability to do this. As far as with the league, specifically, the league should continue its efforts to educate the public about the benefits of a high quality public education. We're going to talk about funding. We need to make people believe that it's worth doing. It needs to continue developing partnerships with other state organizations with similar goals. And we need to continue to advocate actively for increased and more equitable school funding. And we need to improve the stories that are told about schools. We see a lot of negative things out there. And this is a strategy that is within the league's control and over time could help develop the political will needed to effect necessary change. I think you're going to be joining your league to vote on the consensus questions and can ask us clarifying questions, but anything else will be held for later. Thank you.
Carolyn?
I was just wondering, as I listened to the presentation, all the talk about broadband, does that come under school construction?
That's part of infrastructure. Sometimes I think occasionally there have been like federal grants for specific technology advances, but they are one-shot deals. But the general funding for improvements and that kind of stuff falls under infrastructure, and it's the locality's responsibility. Unless the state decides to come in and offer something.
Right. Probably included under renovation costs as part of the $25 billion shortage.
Alice is.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to read your report yet, but did you guys look at where the current funding is coming from? I know that I thought originally that any money coming out of the lottery funds were supposed to be devoted to education. Do you know if that's still happening, not happening, why it's not happening?
I don't. I didn't hear what you said about what kind of funds are being used for.
Well,
Lottery, did you say lottery?
yeah, the lottery.
Okay, right.
I thought that all of the proceeds from the lottery originally were supposed to go towards education. The state lottery.
Right.
Well, one of the issues with this is when the state says they're going to give so much money, they don't tell us, the statistics don't tell us which pots that money is coming from.
Oh, I see.
A significant part of that money that they put in this latest budget could be coming from lottery funds. I don't know where the funds are coming from, but again, when they say they allot money, they don't specify, well, at least I haven't read the details about where it's coming from.
Oh,
It doesn't mean it's going to be in addition to the lottery funds.
Yeah, I just wondered because somewhere I had read or heard that, they were taking the lottery funds and using it for everything, even though it had been earmarked originally for education.
Yeah, I've read that too, and I don't know though.
Some of the lottery funds have been taken for other uses. The 1% grocery tax still goes to education. It was reduced, like there was 1% of, I think, the 5% grocery tax. Some of that was eliminated, but some of it still goes to education. Casinos are getting some of the money that is being generated by casinos is going to education. But that will be several years away from actually making much of a difference. There were some things in the last General Assembly that did help, especially in terms of school construction. One thing, the literary fund was given more money. Specifically for school construction, a lot of the literary funds had actually gone to teacher retirement pensions. And so they kind of even that up a little bit. But there obviously is still much more of a need.
To some extent, also, we knew this year, funding this year was going to be skewed. And in a way, we probably would have chosen a more normal year if we could have, because we knew all of that COVID money was sitting there. So that's why we were looking more at the long-term trends. And again, of course, we will be updating this study before the 2023 league conference, because we know that all that COVID pot made it some extent easier for the General Assembly to address some of the funding issues. But as we could see, there were still no effort to address the long-term inequities in funding of public education. Other questions? We're glad to engage and address any other questions or issues.
Jane Newell wanted to know if the study looked at elected versus appointed school boards.
We didn't get into that at all.
No. We were really looking at statewide issues rather. And in the previous presentation, we did, yes, there were some questions like that. Heather Miller has a question.
Hey, so I apologize if this was mentioned, but with the shortages of bus drivers and how much that has been in the news recently, was transportation to schools also in the study? And I'm sorry, I did not look any of the pre-materials.
We didn't get into that. And the only thing that we have information that's relevant to that really is, again, in this latest budget, the General Assembly recommended a 5% increase in salaries for staff as well as teachers. But again, they didn't fully fund that 5% increase.
I think a lot of people don't realize that when the state says we're giving you a 5%, teachers a 5% increase, what they're really doing is giving teachers a 2.5% increase, and the other 2.5% must come from your local county or city taxes. And in some cases, I think, again, it was Lee County, the last time the raises came through, their teachers did not give a raise because the county simply could not afford their 2.5%. So sometimes all of the big headlines you hear from the General Assembly, you think you're getting a lot more money when actually they're giving a percentage, but they're putting the rest of the financial burden on the locality to fund just with their more limited tax resources, which basically are the real estate tax. Yes, Nancy Mills.
Yes, the example you just gave, is the state's 2.5% contingent on coming up with 2.5%?
Yes, it must be matched by the locality.
It must be matched. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Which makes absolutely no sense.
Right, yeah.
Susan
Rob.
Evans asked if there's a watchdog group that follows education money.
I would say keep up with the Commonwealth Institute, TCI. They were just a great help because they have financial experts on staff who really dig down and take a look at this. So they do a newsletter, and you can also just go to their website, but it's the Commonwealth Institute or TCI. And if you'll look at our full report, you'll see them quoted frequently. Other?
Beth, can y'all hear me? I'm sorry, I'm on my phone.
Yes, yes.
Robin, I should know this because I've been on the committee. When will we start advocating at the General Assembly, and how will we organize that?
Like, that's Carolyn's wheelhouse, not mine.
Carolyn, hello.
We can advocate based on the existing position in the position for action on the state website. It doesn't include all the work that this study has done. But broadly speaking, it probably will let us say, hey, education's important. We have an issue group that will be recommending legislative priorities. And people can join the issue group. And I don't know if Denise Harrington's on the Zoom, but she's actually our director in charge of advocacy. So she would be a good person to talk to.
Thanks, Carol. I am on. I was looking for this link. I missed it, so I just got on a few minutes ago. Please, we are recruiting more people to join this education committee. And we were so gracious last year that Carol Noggle stepped in again, but we are recruiting for, I'm checking to see if she's willing to do it again one more year. But thanks, Carolyn, for the push. That's all I'm going to say.
This is Beth again, and Beth Obenchain. I knew we had this number in the study, full study, but I just couldn't pull it out of my head. But this is some information on the lottery and also the casinos. As you know, the General Assembly approved 5 casinos, I think 4 which have had local approval. And the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee of the General Assembly, which is supposedly a nonpartisan, they have estimated, they say that the Virginia lottery annually gives about $600 million to fund the schools statewide. And compared to that, the 5 casinos would generate, they're estimating about $367 million. Again, that is just sort of an estimate out of the air. But the JLARC 2020 said that about $600 million is generated from the Virginia lottery annually for education. Hey, Dempsey, did you have a comment to add on that?
Well, no, not on that, but on your 5%, 2.5%. Without getting down into the weeds, that's statewide. That's how that works statewide. In the wealthier districts, they would have to put up more. In the poorer districts, they have to put up less. But the other critical issue is that those funds only go to support SOQ positions, and that all other positions, the total amount of those salary increases must come from the local districts. So if you figured it out statewide, it's probably less than 2.5, probably closer to 1.75 that the state gives, and the rest comes from the local.
So for things like we need more English language learner instructors per student that we don't have, those would not be covered in SOQ. So those would have to be funded locally. Give an example.
Vicki Greco put in chat the link to the newest Commonwealth Institute study, which gives statistics about each county or city and the amount of funding that they give. So if you can go to the chat, that's a good link.
There's some other good comments in there too.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Nancy, do you still have a question, or?
I do still have a question on a new one.
Okay, please.
I'm relatively new to Virginia, and
Okay.
I know what SOLs are, but what is the difference in expense, or what's the difference between SOQ and an SOL and how they get divided? Yeah.
Okay, they're totally different documents. The standards
Sure.
of quality have been around for a long time.
Okay,
And they are part of the way the state government is set up. So
Right.
that the State Board of Education sets up, then they're fairly generic things, but it could have, it could include things like the number of teachers per pupil.
okay. Mhm.
But it doesn't get into specific things like what do kids need to know if they're taking US government, or
Yeah,
what the kids in
okay.
the third grade need to know. The standards of learning are the ones that are specific to content, but the
Right.
standards of quality are these, these much broader, more generic.
But that's why I was wondering about, so English language instruction is not an SO.
No, the
Q.
SOQs the standards of quality would include things like the number of teachers you need per pupil for particular things, like for special ed,
Yeah,
English language learners, or
Uh-huh.
just the student pupil ratio, the teacher
Right.
pupil ratio,
yeah,
but it might not.
meet.
Yeah, and they're usually out of date, and
Yeah.
and again,
Yeah.
they're inadequate. They're
Sure.
not what you need. So that even
Right.
if most schools have to fund beyond what the standards of quality require just to do basic stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you. Mhm.
Other questions, please just unmute yourself and ask, or raise your hand. Carolyn, are there any groups that are just breaking out into their own consensus discussions today?
I heard from Charlottesville and Southampton Road, so I've made 2 breakout rooms. Speak now if you need another one, somebody, anybody, going once.
Carolyn, do you want to assign one or a few of us to go to each consensus group in case there are questions, or?
Sure. Or you can choose.
Well, just to make sure
I-
we don't all, yes, go ahead, Mary.
I asked Wayne and Robin to go to
Great.
the Charlottesville group, and you might join Vicky with Southampton Roads.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that in chat, or where would I find the link?
I will post a invitation shortly. It should
Okay.
appear on the screen,
Okay, great.
I hope. Shall I stop recording at this point?
I guess so.
I think that would be fine. As we have time, I just want to say what Robin Smith and Larkin Dudley and Margaret Crystal, we have had fantastic committee chairs leading this study. Dempsey Warner has been our patron saint, guiding us through after he is a former dean of the College of Education at Virginia Tech. And Carolyn K. Wood has been our phenomenal guide through this. We can't say enough about the help that Carolyn has given us through this. She's been just a wonderful guide through this process. So, and we thank you all for attending today. And we are glad if your league is meeting to do the consensus questions at some other time, one of our committee members will be glad to join if you would like us, in case there are other questions.
And if you are passionate about advocating in this upcoming General Assembly, join the Education Issue Group.
Right.